Blue Note Records is, I think, one of these great American stories.
Blue Note was totally what you would call an indie label. It was started by these two guys who came over from Germany in 1939 and just loved American jazz.
Alfred Lion and Francis Wolff coming to America, finding and being attracted to these African Americans playing this music in the late 30s, you know, deciding that they should wholeheartedly document this process and this music because they heard it a different way, and then follow its trajectory for 75 years. Now up till today is quite an achievement.
What makes Blue Note unique is the premise upon which it was started in 1939, which was to capture music in its truest form. And I think Blue Note's gone through many changes over the last 75 years, as music has. In the late 30s, jazz began developing at a rapid rate, and a handful of jazz fans started to do independent labels. The first one was Commodore in 1937, and then in 1938 HRS, and then in 1939 Blue Note. And these were labels that were created by essentially hobbyists that knew nothing about the record business but learned very quickly and wanted to capture the music the way it really sounded. Alfred Lion attended a very historic and integrated concert at Carnegie Hall in December of 1938 called Spirituals to Swing that John Hammond produced. And among the artists on the show, the show covered lots of forms of Black American music. And what excited Alfred the most was the boogie-woogie piano playing of Albert Ammons, Meade Lewis, and Pete Johnson. And 2 weeks later, he had raised enough money to go in the studio with Albert Ammons and Meade Lewis and recorded like 25 or 28 solo and duo performances by the two of them. And then Blue Note was born.
The founders of Blue Note in 1939 left a manifesto. Good old lefty manifesto. And it's just a couple of short paragraphs, but it basically identifies the notion of making uncompromising music that's rooted in authenticity.
To continue to keep the energy, that much passion and energy in a record label is, I mean, this is the recording industry. It's very easy to lose passion in the recording industry. And Blue Note has really consistently tried to maintain that integrity, that level of excellence, and that's what we need to celebrate.
If you go back to Alfred Lion, you know, who started the label, if you go back and look at the musicians he signed, you know, he made records with Thelonious Monk. He was the first guy to record Monk. That's the most outside, still to this day, you know, even though what he did harmonically has permeated the vocabulary of musicians. That was revolutionary music. When he started the Jazz Messengers with Horace Silver and Art Blakey, that was a revolt against the rules of bebop. Art Blakey was throwing backbeats in on the hi-hat and everything. You didn't play a backbeat in bebop, you know, and Horace Silver wanted to do these kind of funky gospel-influenced licks that would have gotten him kicked off the bandstand at Minton's, but that was, now you listen to it now, it sounds very inside because it became an established part of the vocabulary, and people keep changing it. You listen to what Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter were doing on their mid-60s Blue Note records, and that's a radical departure. It's rooted in tradition. All these things are rooted in tradition, but it's completely reinventing the tradition.
I can only speak to the 60s in a very personal way because I came of age in the 60s, and it was a time when music, rock and roll and R&B and jazz was changing. And what was changing was that the anger and the frustration that a lot of us felt socially and politically was creeping into the music, because a lot of musicians felt just as enraged and frustrated.
They were a part of the movement just as much as Martin Luther King was, you know. They were the sounds of this movement. Musicians like Max Roach really kind of put it forward that we want freedom and we want it now. John Coltrane, you know, writing songs like Spiritual or Four Little Girls, dedicated to the the girls who were killed in the bombing in Birmingham, Alabama. Charles Mingus writing a song about the kids in Little Rock, Arkansas trying to go to high school and his distaste for the Governor Faubus. So Charles Mingus, this great bassist and composer, writes a song called Fables of Faubus, all about this, unrest that is happening.
The music of Blue Note is about change. It's about constant change. It's built into the DNA of the music. And so if you just keep rehashing something from 40 years earlier, no matter how magnificent that something may be, then you're totally denying the true spirit of it. And people who try to defend jazz by saying, no, these are the rules of jazz, they've already missed the first rule of jazz, which is don't make any rules. It's always been about revolution.
The phenomenon really exploded when Lee Morgan came back to music actively in the end of 1963. He came back to Blue Note and he cut an album, and one of the tunes was this 24-bar blues called The Sidewinder. And it was just another album. Lee Morgan didn't know, Alfred Lion didn't know, but it exploded. The day it came out, it exploded. It just went through the roof. And became like the first really major hit for Blue Note. The 45 of it was in jukeboxes everywhere. It was on TV commercials. It was all over the place, and it was on the pop charts in the top 20 albums, and it just resonated with people and just became incredibly popular. And then about a year later, Horace Silver wrote a song called Song for My Father. That became an enormous hit as well, ubiquitous on the pop charts and everything. And what happened was, at that time, Blue Note was an independent label, and success threatened its existence. It just couldn't survive because in those days, records were distributed by independent distributors, and the distributors stopped paying Blue Note for their records unless they had a hit. So they would be like delinquent in their payments, and Blue Note almost went out of business as a result of its having two big hits. So they sold the company to a larger label at the time, Liberty Records. And after a year, Alfred Lion found it crippling. He couldn't stand it. He was a nervous wreck. He couldn't work for other people, so he left. Francis Wolff stayed on and ran the label for another 5 years, and then Francis died of a heart attack in 1971. At that point, the label was owned by United Artists Records. At the same time, there was a lot of financial pressure in the record industry in general, but especially in jazz. What kept Blue Note going was that Donald Byrd, who had been on Blue Note for 20 years at that time, produced an album called Blackbird. It became phenomenally successful, and that kept Blue Note going for another few years. The jazz side of Blue Note was fading away. By the early 1981, Blue Note was just dormant. I got a call from Bruce Lundvall, and he said, I'm going to take a job with the MI. They want me to start a New York pop label, but as part of the deal, I told them I want to reactivate Blue Note Records, and so I want you to be involved. When we revived Blue Note in 1985, Bruce said, how about, let's do a concert at Carnegie Hall or Town Hall or somewhere, and we'll get all the great Blue Note artists that are still alive and still playing well, and we'll do a whole history of the label, and we'll have some of the current artists. We launched the label with this Town Hall concert one night with Blue Note, and we just kept putting out reissues and kept signing new artists and signing a lot of artists from the classic Blue Note era. That's how Blue Note got revived.
In the 90s, there was this thing where Greg Osby and us three really consciously trying to approach hip-hop in a way, which I think is a total predecessor to what Robert Glasper is doing now. Is Greg Osby in that time was working with C.L. Smooth, and us three kind of had this remix of an old Herbie Hancock song, Cantaloupe Island, and they called it Cantaloupe or something like this, which became an enormous kind of also hit, kind of remix hit of the song.
Cantaloupe, it just was, oh yeah, absolutely, this is great. It was just an incredible use of music samples and DJing and rhythm, and we wholeheartedly wanted to put it out, but we didn't think it was going to be a big hit. That was.
Yeah, it's like the equivalent of like Sidewinder, like it was on television commercials.
Yeah, it was ubiquitous. Yeah,
When I was hired first to be the chief creative officer of Blue Note Records, and the assignment was very abstract. There were a lot of people in the EMI Corporation who owned the record at the time. There was a lot of talk about closing the label down, making it a website that sold catalog and blue T-shirts. But there were a few people, most notably Dan McCarroll, who were not happy with that idea. They wanted to keep it going as a new music source. Now, I was in New York City. I was producing John Mayer, and we had one night off. I went up to 106th Street to hear a singer named Gregory Porter, who I was just a fan of his. I'd never met him, had no professional association with him. I just went to hear him sing. And I sat there for all 3 sets, eating ribs and drinking coffee. And the next morning, I was having breakfast with my friend Dan McCarroll. And we weren't even talking about music. But at the end of the breakfast, I said, do you still have Blue Note Records as part of Capitol Records? He said, yeah. I said, well, you should sign this guy that I saw last night, Gregory Porter, because he's amazing. And out of that, he offered me a job, because that was the only positive creative idea he'd heard about Blue Note Records. The job was really to identify the aesthetic lying beneath the music on the label, what tied it all together. What became clear was that the label was about revolution and change and being radical.
It seems that in every decade, Blue Note finds kind of miraculously a hit shows up, like here. Yeah. Norah Jones comes into the office. I remember when the demo came into the office and people were just sitting around and they were listening to it, and I was like, wow, that's pretty good. And then a year later, it's like boom, this hit comes out. So Robert Glasper, been on the label for a couple of years, and he does Black Radio Part 1, now that there's Part 2 coming out. He does Black Radio, and then here he is winning R&B Grammy. Norah Jones wins, Best Artist of the Year, that year that her record came out. It's like somehow Blue Note becomes this label that can always keep its ground fertile with all this kind of weird music we all make. And then somebody just that they've already been working with just places, here's the next big thing. And then it becomes, a real sound.
Yeah. There's a sound, there's a Blue Note sound. That was kind of what we were looking for initially. Like like I said, in the 60s, there was a Blue Note sound that's easily identifiable. There's now a 2014 Blue Note sound that you don't hear on coming from any other labels. It has to do with the unique musicians that are signed to the label.
By Blue Note staying on its course and being a passionate, pure operation, it's a label that people respond to deeply, and I think it attracts every generation. It attracts artists of real substance.
They can trace the lineage of the music back. You couldn't have Robert Glasper's music without Art Blakey. So let's investigate Art Blakey. I hope it leads them into everything. I hope that through the music we're making today, we can draw new people in to understand the tradition, that as cool and radical as Glasper's music is today, that's what Art Blakey was in the 1950s and the 1960s. Well, actually always was.
It's some kid out here right now, who has this idea about something they are facing as an issue, as a challenge. And if you see that, if there are enough pathways that you've seen other people go down, then hopefully that becomes the inspiration for you.
The whole idea is to keep it moving forward. And to keep it moving forward, you have to have new people coming along who know the traditions in order to break them, And that's really what it's about.